Well, we've discussed a bit about the meaning and nature and the case and the state of such as it is of mainstream corporate science. We've looked into the possibilities of our past, where we came from and maybe from whom. We've looked into the possibility that we have share genetic similarities with Bigfoot, Sasquatch, because of the genetic experimentation that occurred leading up to our creation as a species. But there's one thing we haven't looked at yet, and that is, where are we now and where might we be going? David Pursglove has been trained in Gestalt therapy, trained with Laura Pearls, one of the founders, if I'm not mistaken, of that particular tradition. Practiced in New York in the 60s, Boston, San Francisco, and the Bay Area for 23 years. Has edited a book called Zen and the Art of Close Encounters and Crazy Wisdom and UFOs. Is currently the director of what's known as the New Being Project. And that website is newbeing.org, which I highly recommend. He's here to give us his insight and give us his understanding about where we might be headed from here and how we might get there and some of the hurdles we might have to run over or trip over on our way from here to there. Please join me in welcoming David Pursglove.
Thanks a lot, Matt. Appreciate it. And I appreciate all the foregoing. Wow, you guys have plowed the ground for me. This is just perfect. I couldn't imagine a better setup to do what I'm about to do, what I'm about to say than what you guys have given. As you see on the screen, a quote that I fell in love with when I first saw it, and from which I took the title of this presentation, the part that's in red. And the good news. I'm going to go with the good news first. The part about us that's marvelous. I mean, we really are quite marvelous. I'm just going to go through quickly a list in no special order in time, but of people, a short list of people who I think are absolutely marvelous throughout human history and who have given us tremendous gifts. I'll try to keep this brief because, you know, I could spend 10 or 15 hours just on people, just mentioning names that everybody's heard, right? And I'm going to mention a couple that you haven't heard who I think are really pretty hot. So, here are some of the Wunderkind, the human Wunderkind. Socrates, to Mozart, to Rembrandt, to Shakespeare, to Gandhi, to Jung, to Frieda Fromm-Reichmann. Not many of you have ever heard of her, but she was the Hannah Green's therapist at Chestnut Lodge outside Washington, D.C., in the book, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, which I hope a lot of you have already read. And if you haven't, please do. It's to cry for. But Frieda Fromm-Reichmann was one of the most insightful therapists ever. Despite what we might think of Sigmund Freud, by the way, he was also a hell of a therapist. There's a lot of places he made some terrible errors, but he was awfully good as a therapist, very intense. Okay, from John Bell, Bell's theorem. Many of you have heard of that. Brilliant piece of scientific insight. Emma Goldman, the famous anarchist, and an anarchist is about anarchism, not anarchy. Okay, it's a whole system of governments. It's a way of looking at governance that's quite different, and she gave us great gifts. Was a brilliant writer. To Werner Heisenberg, okay? The interference principle, I'm just bouncing around here all over, right? Just to give you the scope of who we are and what wonderment we can provide, I guess is the right word. Isadora Duncan, how about her? Rupert Sheldrake, some of you know who he is. Morphogenetic resonance. To Satchmo. Anybody ever hear West Side Blues? Oh my God. Okay. To John Edward, who's on TV regularly, can connect people, total strangers in the audience, to people, their relatives on the other side. Piece of cake, he can just do it. To Daniel Tammet, the guy that did 22,215, or pi to 22,215 places in 5 hours, one sitting, with it just out of his head, right? Perfect. He's a savant, but he's a functional savant. Okay, there's some that aren't, some that are, but he's really quite remarkable. There's a video on him. And just think, if only one of us can do that, who the hell are we? Right? If one of us can do what John Edward can do, if one of us is a Mozart, oh, and so forth. Bessie Smith, oh, some of you oldsters might know her. And then, of course, Zachariah Sitchin. I couldn't possibly leave him out in this context, right? And then a pair of people, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Boy, oh boy, what a gift, huh? Yeah, right. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton is a rhetorician to cry for. Very few people can put a sentence together, a long sentence, the way she can, and it's exhortative, but it's not propaganda. Oh, wow, what a talent. And brilliant, beautiful. The sentences flow like you just kind of dance along with her as she writes. And then, of course, the dean of modern comedy, Robin Williams. Who else, right? To cap the list, right? Ain't nobody like Robin, right? I don't think there's ever been a comic like him. Okay, that give you a taste? You all know the taste, but I just wanted to kind of, really put it on the end of your tongue right there. Okay, let's see. I think I got to change. We'll be back to this slide again. Okay, here comes the not so good news. But always in contrast, I'm always thinking in contrast to, if somebody can do what Satchmo did, if somebody can be a Daniel Tammet, imagine what? Wow, we can already do that. We're already able to do that. Oh, that gives me, well, it gets me up in the morning, let me put it that way. Now, let's talk about PTS and PTS without the D. You notice that that's the way I got it set up there. And OC without the D. I am very opposed to the psychiatric and insurance company biz of putting the word disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder. Oh, because that places the responsibility for it in you, right? Well, in my case, me, right? All right. That somehow I'm to blame for this trauma that happened to me and that I have a reaction to. And if I'm doing obsessive compulsive, if the little boy is washing his hands 24 times a day, he's to blame for that. He should just, is he morally bankrupt or whatever it is, or he's badly trained, or he's something, or and this is where the psychiatry stuff gets really nasty, he's sick. He's got wires loose in his brain, chemical imbalance, and all the rest of the lineup. No, that's not right. Something else is going on. It's probably interpersonal, it's intrafamilial. Maybe it's worse than that. Maybe it's a lot of different kinds of things. And maybe there are things which it's like catching a cold. You have to run a while to catch up with it and get it, right? So it's this kind of thing where, when somebody's really got some kind of dysfunctional thing going on, like washing their hands 20 times a day, and they don't know why they're doing it, they don't know what causes it, and nobody can get it out of them. Yeah, they got a problem. But then so does somebody whose loved one just died have a problem. Do we say they're sick because they're grieving and tearing their hair out? No, we only reserve that for certain kinds of things, right? We say that they're ill, chemical imbalance and all that. Get some water. These two, I'm giving this sort of Psych 202, the first couple of classes in Psych 202. They don't teach this in 101. I took 101. They don't talk about this stuff in that. Because this is psychodynamics, and you don't get into that until a little bit later. But I'm going to do this because we're going to be talking about us, all of us, the entire species, as post-traumatic stress and obsessive-compulsive beings. We do that. I shouldn't say beings because that identifies it the way I didn't mean, the way I was just trying not to identify it. But we do that. We do suffer from post-traumatic stress. No question about it. But let me just go a little further with the description here so that we're all on the same page, because these terms are being thrown around a lot now. Post-traumatic stress is being thrown around a lot in the media because the soldiers are coming back from Iraq, and for the first time, we're hearing, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of cases of post-traumatic stress, but the term is thrown around without definition in the media. And I think we all better, in this room at least, get on the same page about what we're talking about there. Post-traumatic stress, the simple illustration, is the guy back from Nam, the Nam vet, who's got the 1,000-yard stare, and he's not feeling real good, and has been not able to sleep very well, all kinds of problems. And he's sitting in the living room, and some yo-yo friend of his walks in the door, in the back behind him, and yells as he comes in the door, "Incoming!" And the guy, the Nam vet, dives under the coffee table, breaking furniture as he goes and knocking somebody over. And he does it, bang! He doesn't think. It's not something he's worked up as an act. It's nothing that he is, that we could say about him that he is, there's no intention, willed intention involved. It's just react, bang. You dive into the bunker when you hear those words. That's where he was. He was in Nam at a forward post, and that's what you had to do when you heard the whistle of a mortar round coming in. So that's a pretty vivid illustration of post-traumatic stress, and a real easy one to see. And there's a lot of guys, of course, right now that have been in veterans hospital, VA hospitals, who've been there for 15 years, who can't stop having the terrible dream and so on. There are remedies for them, but most of the psychiatric people are not doing those, not helping with those remedies. They're not using the good ones that can be used. They feed them drugs which suppress symptoms, but don't help, really, the basic problem. Here's another one. Here's how, to get into the obsessive compulsive thing, where the two interact. The two, often you'll see the two together in one person. Obsessive compulsive and post-traumatic stress. And sometimes you'll see one dominate, one of these syndromes dominating, and sometimes you'll see the other one, and sometimes you'll see a mix. Let's say the toddler, he's 2, gets knocked over and snarled at by a big dog just after mom has walked into the kitchen where there's a kettle on, there's a lot of noise there while the kettle is whistling. And she's walked into the kitchen just for a second. The toddler walks over to the dog and sort of flops onto the dog. The dog jumps up and snarls at the kid and knocks the kid back over. And she and she'll hear the child yell, but by the time she has gotten back into the room, the dog has run away. The kid can't tell her what the problem was or what happened So she doesn't know that it was the dog that had anything to do with the dog. She just thinks the kid fell over. The kid doesn't remember this. He was pre-verbal. The kid didn't have language. He can't tell mom that's what happened. He can't point at the dog, or he can't even do that, right? The dog's gone anyway. The kid doesn't remember this and gets over it, at least at the time, but then he forgets it completely. Or more likely, the way I would prefer to put it is, it goes down into that basement where the things that are forgotten are kept, right? Or maybe the attic, I'm not sure, but let's say basement, it sounds more, I don't know, dank, I guess. So at 15, he doesn't understand why. He now is terrified of dogs forever. I mean, unbelievably so. Some of you may have met children like this. I have. But maybe they're afraid of dogs, or they're afraid of something, right? Where there was some trauma that nobody knows that the trauma actually occurred. So there's a terrible bad phobia about dogs later, no understanding why. And then, to get into the obsessive compulsive part of the thing, the action, at age 15, he starts a big and expensive collection of anti-dog whistles and electronic dog repellers and taser equipment, and keeps them in a glass case in his bedroom. He doesn't know why. Parents don't know why. He just does it. He doesn't know what he's doing. He just, oh my God, every time he sees one of these things that's going to repel a dog, he buys it, right? Even if he can't afford it, right? Or even weirder, a collection of studded dog collars. Now that can get into some weird stuff, and with some sadomasochistic implications here and there and all kinds of stuff. I just bring it up because oftentimes these things don't show up as simple as I'm saying it. There'll be 3 or 4 layers in between the actual trauma and the symbological presentation of the symbolic presentation of this trauma, and then another layer and another layer, until you have to work your way back sometimes so you find out what the trauma is. That is, if you're working with somebody who has this kind of difficulty. Okay, that's the Psych 202 part. Now, let's see, I think I got that all right. We're not ready for another slide yet. We are obsessive and compulsive with one of the central enterprises of our species being to make war, to kill each other, or otherwise do damage or be violent with each other, at any level one can name, from international to intrafamilial. Now, when we think about it, and all we've heard today, this is a result that could be easily expected. It just happens that the traumas occurred 10,000 generations ago. And I'm counting generations as if they were all 25 years long, and I know that the early ones weren't. But just for the hell of it, let me just say, do it that way, 10,000 plus generations ago. We were bred, in quotes. I'm not sure what is the correct term. What should I be saying there? We weren't bred, we were sort of quasi-manufactured. Right? We were bred kind of in a weird sort of way, right? We were a jump-started evolutionary, a jump-started, I'm looking for the word, and I can't find it, of course, now that I want it. But if we, and of course we were likely thought of and treated by these great big beings who, quote, bred us as subhuman. This is not a trauma? Ask any African American, right, who had the same treatment in this country. Or any slavery. We're not the only people. I leveled, sort of take shots at America, or the United States. But slavery is, hey, it's as old as we are, right? As old as our species. We started that way. So the whole slavery thing has been just a piece of trauma-generating business amongst ourselves and with the other, whoever is the bosses, the massa, ever since we've been around. We were then, another one, you want another trauma? Let's just pile them up, because there's a dozen. I'm only going to go for 3 or 4. We were used as cannon fodder in the Nephilims, I call them the Nephilim, but they're the Anunnakis, wars with each other. Gee, that ought to, put a little kink in your psyche, wouldn't it? We were then, to really cap it off, abandoned to a flood, right? Was supposed to do us all in. Another kink, right? Whoop, twist, 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 twist. Tighten the knot. More trauma, trauma upon trauma upon trauma. If these were, those 3 would be enough, all by themselves, to create a post-traumatic stress case of all species down the road, right? Because they would bury it, just like the kid with the dog, right? This happened to us at the point where we would have hardwired it. None of us remember any of this. It's not in our history books. It's nothing, we're very fortunate, all of us in this room, to know enough to realize, or to have been subjected or given this gift by Zecharia Sitchin and these others who have looked back and said, wow, they're a nasty bunch of people, and we were their bitches. Or worse, way worse. And in another sense, we really were their bitches, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So there's more. The thing about war and the fact that we keep on doing it and doing it and doing it again and again and again, even though we know, by now it's been 6,000 years, hello? We know it's not just a moral or an ethical bad option. It doesn't work. It's like putting your hand on a hot stove. Damn, you're going to come away hurt, right? We know not to do that. We know to look both ways for crossing the street. But we keep on doing this one thing over and over and over. Always, now that we have planetary communication, we know, and we have known, I think, probably since around 1900, maybe in the late 1800s, that there's always a war or 2 or 10 going on the planet at any given moment. And pre-literate people, you can't do the noble savage trip with them, right? They can get into traps just as bad and have wars with each other, the tribal horror shows. It goes on and on and on. Not everybody, not all pre-literate small groups or tribes do that, but a huge number of them do. Fatal stuff. They go out and kill each other. Whoa, big battles. Whoa. And they glorify it. We glorify it. Wow. Trumpets, fanfares, marches, the whole thing. And violence. And we know that doesn't work. Interpersonally, we know it doesn't work. But we do it formally. We execute criminals, right? Whoa. What's that going to do? Just make somebody mad, want vengeance, so the cycle keeps on going. No. Doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. It's impractical. But we keep doing it. That, by the way, happens to be one of the definitions of some kinds of insanity. You keep doing the same thing over and over again that doesn't work, and you expect this time that it's going to work. I'll leave you to your own conclusions. I used the word, right? Okay. Okay, just to give put the cherry on the sundae about that point. Here we go. This is Gary Larson. Catch the flavor? What I love about it is that it ties us in with the aliens and puts us in a mason jar. Oh, Larson is amazing. Here's another one in the same vein by him. This, by the way, shameless plug. This is my book, Zen and the Art of Close Encounters, Crazy Wisdom in UFOs. It's an anthology, a lot of the good writers in it. A lot of good writers on UFO stuff that do not accept the sort of simplistic nuts and bolts view of the matter. And we found out when I was doing the book in 94, 95, that Gary Larson was just about to retire, and he had said, no, nobody except environmental nonprofits could use his cartoons. I would have paid to have this cartoon in here. So we finally, the woman I was working with writing this article, Jean Mundy, and I worked on this and developed, we had to describe, in one place in this article, we had to describe this cartoon, another Larson cartoon. This Larson subtle ego twister in which two ETs, the ones with the eyes on stalks, are hiding behind a tree in a park. One has a clipboard tucked under his arm. They are near but out of sight of a paved walk. Propped against a tree opposite them on the other side of the walk, facing the walk down that way, is a full-sized dressing room mirror. Generic dumpy human male. You've all seen the way Gary draws us with the great big pants and that kind of, you know. Out for a stroll, approaches on the walk, approaching the mirror. One ET says to the other, and now we'll see if it attacks its own reflection. Yeah. That's us. We do that too. We're not just cruel to others. We're vicious to ourselves, and we can really get tangled up in that. Just think of the 13th century flagellants who, during the Black Plague, these monks that would walk through the towns chanting and beating themselves on the back with cats of nine tails. And I mean, that's just a sort of really obvious horror show, but we can do worse than that subtly to ourselves. We come to the place where it's very easy to get a child to come to a place by telling him that schools do this pretty well, but we can add to some parental uglies to it too, and so that the child feels very soon, I'm just nothing. I'm crap. I shouldn't even be breathing the air. I shouldn't be occupying the space I am. And you can get a suicide out of that if you carry it along far enough. Or you can get somebody who decides, well, the hell with it then, I'm going to just start shooting people. And they do. That happens all the time too. So again, the violence begetting the violence, begetting the violence, begetting the violence. Park. We got to go back into, I just realized in the little break here that I should go back into Psych 202 for just a second. One of the things to notice is that in terms of this kind of obsessive compulsive behavior that we evidence is that we spend more cultural treasure and treasury treasure, gold and silver and money, on wars and violence than any other human enterprise. And that's not just us. I mean, think the Roman Empire. Wow. Damn. So there are three ways in which we're post-traumatic stress. I think I've already listed them. There's one more that we could talk about, and that's, I said, cruelty. There's cruelty all around, and that kind of thing. It's cruelty to ourselves, cruelty to other people, that whole business. The slave stuff. And we're traumatized in a way, especially with the abandonment thing, we're traumatized like foundlings. Has anybody ever seen a film of foundlings, a foundling hospital? A foundling is a baby that was like left on a doorstep or something, and then they take it to this hospital. Not everybody is aware that these places exist, but they do. And if a baby, child, an infant, or even a toddler is not touched, not picked up, not cared for, and gets a lot of FaceTime and touching and handling and rocking and singing and talking, and it'd be closeness to another human being. Doesn't matter whether the human being is the actual biological mother or not. Just the infant has to have this. What they do is they start in their cribs headbanging. They grab hold of the crib like this and they start whacking the edge of the rail of the crib like this. And they can go on for hours and do that for hours. That's one of the hardest things I've ever had to watch, was a film of babies doing that. And possibly it was more difficult for me because I had a mother who was pretty distant too. So, you know, I know what that feels like. It wasn't that bad, but I never got to the headbanging part. But that isolation, I know where that's at. And we were abandoned. Same thing. We were not only slaves, but then we were abandoned too. Oh, or I suppose if we got up in those Anunnaki's faces and said the wrong thing at the wrong time, they'd just flat off us. Boom, you're finished. You're out of here. You're a dead body. Bang. Because you're only an animal critter anyway. Except that we were more than that. We're the Wunderkind, we're the Socrates, we're the Mozarts, we're the Daniel Tammets. Oh, so we are something more than that, and we have their intelligence and genetic strain in us, and yet what they were doing is treating us as, not even as well as we'd treat a cat or a dog. One very important thing before I go on is to point out, to go back to the soldier, the non-vet, that dives under the table at the word incoming. And the kid that's collecting the dog tasers and all that, doesn't know what he's doing. We are not to blame. This is, if you take nothing else away from this presentation, I hope you can take that. We are not to blame for this. We can't help it. Not on our own. We can't help it. As I'll get into a little bit more, you can't bootstrap yourself out of this. Ourselves, we can't get ourselves, well, by God, I will up and I will not be obsessive compulsive anymore. No, that never works with obsessive compulsives. It doesn't work with addictions, which is another kind of obsessive compulsive behavior. You can't jack yourself out of an addiction if you've really got it and it's got you by the physiological cojones. No. And to make it worse, we blame ourselves. Original sin. I mean, just for starters, okay? And we can work up from there, okay? We're not to blame for this. And the worst thing we continue to do day in and day out is to blame ourselves for any one of these things, right? And when we absorb the blame from the others, right? The others are contemptuous of us, right? You know, what the hell are you doing? You're so afraid of dogs. What's the matter with you? And we take that as something, we heap the coals of fire on our own heads, and on and on and on. It was enormously important to me to discover, when I discovered the whole Sitchin thing and sort of started digging into it, and I had a big background in psychotherapy already and a whole bunch of other things, and suddenly to come across the realization, oh my God, we aren't to blame. I'm not to blame. Oh no, this crap that I do, oh, I'm not to blame for it. Doesn't mean I don't need to do something to undo it, yes, but I'm not a sinful, ugly, horrible, vicious creature. And that goes for even the murderers and the killers and the soldiers and even the current administration, which is very hard for me to say. Yeah, right. But they're clearly post-traumatic stress victims. Just look at Dick Cheney's face, okay? Right. There we go, okay. I mean, saying that is almost gallows humor, but at the same time, it helped me tremendously to say that, to realize for myself that it wasn't, I'm not to blame. Oh, there's a whole different kind of breath I can take at that realization. And it's a body realization. I'm not to blame. My God, I didn't do this. I'm the victim of it. Big difference. Big difference. Okay, now we're going to move along into another whole arena that is even more traumatic and difficult and thorny. And that's the sexual mess and the gender wars. I think I've got a slide. Don't worry, it's not anything awful. No, this is not. Yes, it is. Yes, it's there, but I forget what the next one is. Anyway, we'll get to that. Okay. I am going to have to read you a piece I wrote about 10 years ago, because if I don't read it, I will forget pieces of it. It's reasonably intricate, and I'm afraid that if I try to extemporize it or run from an outline, I will forget to say some important things and leave people sitting in the audience saying, but, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to read you this piece. I wrote it as a piece on what would now be a blog, but was a forum on The Well. Maybe some of you remember The Well in the early 90s, and there were a number of really good folks on that group. And we were talking about the Nephilim and the Anunnaki and all the rest. And in the bargain, I'm going to be talking about incest because, well, you'll see why, but I just want to warn you up front. I'm going to be talking about incest not as a criminal endeavor, okay? The Lulus, that's who we were. That's who we were called. Everybody know that in Sanskrit, the transliteration of the word for us is Lulu. Talk about irony. I wonder if the cartoonist who developed Little Lulu knew that, right? I doubt it, because that's an old cartoon, right? But there's Little Lulu. It's just almost too perfect. The irony's amazing. There's this little girl with an afro, and she's running around doing dumb things, right? She's Little Lulu. That's us. The first sexual contacts after they were given the power to reproduce, and I don't know if we all still agree, or whether Sitchin even agrees with this, but if I understand it right, the first Little Lulus were generated through using the Nephilim females as broodmares, basically. And then I guess they got kind of restive with that role. And also they couldn't possibly couldn't produce fast enough, so they gave the power to reproduce to us, to tweak the genetics again to give us the power. Okay, I think I've got that right. And so it would have to have been incestuous automatically, because this is assuming they evidenced no sexual activity at all prior to the Neph changing the genetic mix so they could reproduce. At least there would have been brother-sister incest right from scratch, since all the original cloned Lulus were brothers and sisters of a special sort. Then there would also have been some form of intergenerational incest too. Among them, older clones with younger ones, etc. I'm saying clones, I'm using that in the loosest possible sense. I mean the Lulus. Though at the time, that certainly wouldn't have been labeled by the participants as anything like incest. On the contrary, it would have been the only norm in town. The Neph might easily have seen, I call them the Neph, I mean the Nephilim. The Neph might easily have seen the Lulus as just another kind of animal. And in animals, there are no incest prohibitions. If the Neph knew anything at all about animal breeding, which apparently they did, they were able to do genetic engineering to the point of creating Lulus, okay, so they must have known something about it. They might have noticed that a certain amount of interbreeding makes for healthier and more robust progeny, up to a point, and allowed the Lulus to have at it, assuming that the usual rules of chance in animal breeding would produce lots of good little grunts in the long run. At least Enki, you pronounce him Enkai, right?
Oh, right.
Are you okay? Okay, I call him Enki. Might have thought the experiment was worth the doing, given that the Neff broodmare ladies were doubtless getting increasingly restive with their roles, as I said. And so, the delicately swept aside enigma in Genesis has a potential explanation. If Adam and Eve were the very first humans, the puzzle runs, and Cain and Abel were their kids, there must have been a girl child in there somewhere for the human line to continue. Guess Eve must have had a girl, and guess what? Oh, me, oh, my, maybe the father of more, maybe must have been the father of her kids. Or, I'm sorry, Cain, I skipped a line. I guess Eve must have had a girl, and guess what? Cain or Abel must have been the father of her kids. Or, oh me, oh my, maybe the father of more of Eve's kids. And then maybe the fathers of some of those kids, et cetera, et cetera. So what we do is we start with an incestuous line, and even, that's the biblical condensation of the story. The condensation and sort of distortion and twisting up and compacting. And yet, even if we just, if we say, oh, well, no, wait, let's go back and let's do it Sitchin's way, it comes out to the same thing, right? Yet another instance in Genesis condensation, pretzeling up of an original Anunnaki scenario. Incest is at the very root of our sexual reproductive history and is built into the human sexual impulse itself. It's there. We were incestuous, for starters. And that's without even touching the later scenario of the giants in the earth in those days, and you quoting the rest of what Dave quoted before. I'd only add here that since sexuality is a hugely powerful human propeller, and if incest was utterly natural, the rule rather than the exception from the get-go, then any cruel cutoff and suppression of incestuous sexual love could make an even deeper wound, a more formidable negative imprint in the human psyche than I or Dr. Freud had previously guessed. Dr. Freud, I don't know if I say this down below, I haven't read this in a week or so. One of Freud's sort of startling insights, came out of nowhere, I've never been able to find it again, but someone quoted it before, is the incest taboo is the most maiming wound. Now, how he got that, a practicing Viennese psychiatrist in Victorian Vienna. Freud he was good about some stuff, right? He saw he could see through. He was a good detective right, about some of these things. If my memory serves, in Genesis Revisited, Sitchin mentions that the Neff had a relationship system in which marrying of half-siblings was not only okay, but encouraged in certain circumstances. If I remember right, the quote is something like, the half-sister is the preferred breeding partner. That's interesting in itself and testifies to the probability that they had more than just enough genetic engineering information to concoct us Lulus. Seems likely to me they'd also figured out some eugenics, well, here comes that word, for their own species, or whatever they might have called it at the time, that worked well on their home planet. Eugenics, oh boy, is that a deadly term or what, right? But there it is. The half-sister was the preferred breeding partner, which means that they were also polyamorous. You have to be polyamorous. There has to be more than one mating system. It can't be just monogamy to get a half-sister, right? For there to be a half-sister at all, right? But what might have happened even in what we might term a sexually liberated group when they created Lulus and the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair and they took them wives, all of which they chose, and the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men and they bare them children to them. Well, that doesn't sound like marriage to me. It sounds like a fest, a fiesta. Let's go do it. And they're, think about a cowboy and a sheep, okay? Does the analogy make it to you folks? You get to what I'm after here, okay? I mean, that's, you know, get it on with them. It just happens that in this case, the genetic material was sufficient that they could produce children. Oh, now the fit really hits the shan, okay? Here come the babies out of that, all right? It's polygamous. At least it's polygamous. Not necessarily polyamorous. I'm romanticizing it to call it that. It's probably in that time-honored Near Eastern polygynous form upon which correctly no love is lost by today's feminists. It's plainly some kind of incest, at least in our terms. The Lulus were the Neff's sort of half-children, or nieces and nephews, or cousins, or what? What kind of relationship system would you call? How do you describe a relationship system like that? However, because of their relationship system, the Neff might not have seen such liaisons as problematic, at least at first. The trouble might have started when the progeny of the Neff and the Lulu started getting uppity and demanding their birthrights of the Neff progenitors. I just forgot the guy's name. Gilgamesh, the Gilgamesh epic, yes, thank you. Oh, here it is, right, it's right here, I'm sorry, it's the next word. I'm getting excited here, I can't read it all. The Gilgamesh epic may have been only a representative story or a synoptic tale written much later of one more grim and chronic hassle the Lulus suffered at the hands of their, quote, parents, unquote. Not enough the Lulus are little slaves, they also got to get screwed and then screwed out of their heritage. And I'll bet the Neff male honchos coming in unto the daughters of men promised them everything. Why not? Notice it wasn't the male Lulus coming in unto the daughters of the Nephilim. That's not what we hear about. What does that remind us of in recent history? Plantations. The whole scene starts to look something like the slavery set up in the USA in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Lots of little racially mixed babies, etc., and probably eventually similar kinds of heavy punishments of male Lulus who dared to even hint at a sexual interest in a Neff female. Lynching, I believe they call the punishment for that. I don't have to stretch my imagination very far to see some Neff males with light-colored skin getting into a KKK mode. I mean, how was it, after all, that some of the Lulus, the dark-colored ones, got banished to the outback? That's what Sitchin reports, that they didn't like some of them, especially the dark-colored ones, outback. And this all started in Africa, so guess who's in Africa? Guess who's in Central Africa? Who do we find in Central Africa? Black Lulus. Okay. Smart, too. And they can dance. That's supposed to be really wickedly ironic. I hope you got it. Okay. The whole scene starts to look something like this. I already said that. So one point to make here is that the very odd, very tenacious racial prejudice we're all too familiar with has its origins with the Neff and is, as everybody knows but no one can prove, sexually based. However, no one, not even the best shrinks I've read, have come up with a satisfactory explanation for its murderous irrationality and that tenacity, generation after generation, I just mentioned. A Freudianized or neo-Freudianized social psychologized explanation alone just won't cut it. How does this thing become the kind of taboo that it is? And it just is. Tell me that a southern white male addressing a black man who has just made some sort of suggestive remark about a white woman that the white guy has heard, who now either kills or takes the black man out and lynch him. That's a post-traumatic stress response, folks. That poor guy, that poor white guy doesn't know what the hell he's doing either. And in case you needed just one more convincer, ask yourself why it is that the word that will trigger a killing razor fight on the street in Harlem is one black man calling the other a mother. Have you all heard about playing the dozens? That word has 12 letters in it. If the one black man says to another black man, you mofo, you this, that, and they go back and forth and they up the ante until someone says all 12 letters. Then the razors come out and somebody gets killed. Why is that word the one? Why is that the murdering word? Further, why did Oedipus Rex become one of the all-time great tragedies in Western culture? I doubt that even in today's Hollywood, where a picture with as gruesomely silly a premise as The Silence of the Lambs can sweep the Oscars, you could sell a producer on the idea of a show where a guy accidentally kills his dad, not even knowing it is his dad, and then marries his mother, not even knowing it is his mother. Then when he finds out, puts out his own eyes, both of them, for God's sake, and banishes himself forever, and his mother, Jocasta, kills herself. Yeah, that kind of stuff makes psychiatrist Hannibal the Cannibal Lecter seem almost plausible as a character. It's arguably at least a baby step up from putting your own eyes out to chowing down on other people's faces. And why the eyes? Where did Sophocles get that? I've never understood that. If somebody gets an idea, tell me, because I've never understood why would he put his own, and
Can't look at himself anymore.
that could be. Yeah, there could be I think it's a multi-layered meaning, but why would Sophocles pick that? Anyway, that's a digression. I think we can all come up with some good reasons for having social rules against certain kinds of incestual relations, especially some that result in babies. The infamous Jukes and Calicax, for instance, by the way, that whole story has been debunked. I wrote this before I had found that out. The Jukes and Calicax thing is not, it's a long, complicated discussion, but they were incestuous, and I lived in northern West Virginia, out on Snake Hill Road outside Morgantown, West Virginia, and there were incestuous families in various houses all around us. And they seemed to be pretty healthy kids that were hanging out. Violent, but healthy, you know. But anyway, they allegedly passed very low IQs down from generation to incestuous generation. But not this case. But not this case or 1,000 others like it, or a raft of evidence that incest is damaging in whatever ways that can explain that it's a taboo, a piece of behavior, even a thought that is out of the range of human discourse, reserved for the shrink's office and looked upon as pathology, or at best something to get over, even there. Whence arises all the gigantic charge on the topic? It is absolutely impossible to get a hearing in almost any human culture for a view suggesting there may be circumstances in which certain kinds of incest would be okay. Just go to almost any marriage license bureau, there's 30 states in this country, and try to get a permission to, marry your first cousin, for instance. They won't even tell you why there's a law against it. It's because they don't know, and furthermore are seriously offended that you want to discuss it. Okay, here's the part that I forecast earlier. Paul Goodman, one of the authors of Gestalt Therapy, which I was trained in earlier, of the House of, was not aware of anything like the Nephilim scenario. Sitchin hadn't published anything on it when Goodman wrote the following in a brilliant essay called Golden Age. Quote, Freud makes Moses not a Gentile but an Egyptian of the house of the Pharaohs. And what is this house? Its most salient characteristic is that it is the royal incestuous family and therefore divine. That's my emphasis. It is the house of the descendants of the wedded brother and sister. Elsewhere, Freud speaks of the most maiming wound inflicted on mankind by civilization, the ban against incest. But the pharaohs did not suffer so severely from this wound as the rest of mankind. And of course, royal and incestuous are equated not only in Egypt. The royal family is almost by definition incestuous. If you can't marry anybody but royalty, eventually who are you going to be getting it on with, right? Or creating children with. Goodman could have added that in most Western royal families, the rules are such that were they followed to the letter, I've said this already, incest is almost inevitable. And notice that few, if any, public outcries have ever arisen when close royal relatives are joined in wedlock. Interesting piece of business, eh? It's okay for the most public, most visible, most exalted human figures to be incestuous. The commoners applaud it. God forfend any commoner should try the same, though. With Sitchin's work, we now have a pretty good idea of the origin of this. Well, shall we call it charitably a double standard? In psych biz slang, it'd probably be dubbed schizzy. Freud's phrase, the most maiming wound, has haunted me since I read Golden Age in the 60s. First, I was astonished that this giant-stepping Viennese Victorian doctor had even touched on the incest issue at all, except perhaps in the usual abusive criminal context. He was notably conservative on a number of issues, female sexuality for one, where one would have expected his own work to have dictated a more radical or a looser stance. But here he is, Papa Freud, scoring one of the profoundest, way out there psychological bullseyes ever scored. What a sensational and excruciating inference. And he sure as hell would have scoffed at any idea of big aliens doing genetic engineering 350,000 years back. But I was haunted more than astonished. I felt I'd glimpsed something vital, but where was the rest of the picture? How in the hell could we critters do such a nasty on ourselves? What made it stick so tight all over the globe, millennium after millennium? The Neph burned it into our circuit boards way back when. That's what made it stick. And that's how we're PTS. It's an imprint as potent or more potent than the kind that makes an adult inexplicably terrified of big dogs if she was just one snapped at and already ran that. My hunch is that the shit hit the fan so badly when the Neph came down hard on the Lulus, and probably on each other too, just to make things even nastier for the already spooked slave mentality Lulus, who were dependent on their special boss Nephs or parent Nephs to protect them, that many Lulus died. Many were banished, babies were exterminated, the entire Herodian Holocaust. Everybody remembers King Herod. Enough of a horror show, especially when locked into maternal and sexual feelings and impulses. We have buried even any positive incestuous ideas, let alone feelings, way down in the bottom of the place where all the forgotten stuff is. Enough to make it appear, now roughly 10,000 generations later, that the incest taboo is part of human nature. Lest some of you accuse me of touting the same doom and gloom portrait painted of the end of civilization as discontent, let's see, I don't think I need to go into that. I can leave it right at, it's part of human nature. We accept that it's part of human nature, except, whoops, let's not forget royalty. The king and queen of da-da-da are da-da-da, they're related. Okay.
20 minutes.
Thank you. I think I'm going to get there. So that, and the gender wars, I'm skipping the business of the gender wars. All I have to do is just print those words up there, and you can see, I'll just take what I just said and just apply it. There it is. What else would we have? And post-traumatic stress, well, how about an argument over the breakfast table? Mom and pop. Where did all that stuff come from? Okay. I said it before, I'll say it again. It's important. You can't bootstrap yourself out of post-traumatic stress. Ask any soldier who's been hanging out in a VA hospital for 15 years and still having the terrible dreams. and remembering it, can't sleep, can't function. He's tried everything. But he can't do it himself. We can't do it ourselves. That's my thesis. There may be ways of ameliorating some of it. I'm not arguing that case, but I mean to really take the whole species and lift the post-traumatic stress stuff off so that we are now very different beings. We got to have help. We're not going to be able to do that even if half of the human race becomes a therapist, the other half becomes the client, and then we flip for the afternoons or whatever, right? It's not going to work. It's not going to work. One of the first reasons it's not going to work, and people are going to say, well, what happened here? Oh, I see. I must have yanked it, sorry. What people will say when I've put this idea in front of some folks before, well, we'll grow out of it. We will become more spiritual. If that would work, it should have worked already. I mean, how many spiritual traditions do we need? How many avatars and spiritual? Come on, it's not going to work. You can't get there from here. It's not only not our fault, but we can't get over it on our own. Whew. That's a nasty trap. That's a tough one. So as I address that one and kind of, it's just did numbers on my head, trying to say, well, where the hell, how, what? And I had been in 88 and 89 dragged kicking and screaming into the whole UFO thing and the fact that there is other intelligence around, and I began to examine the evidence. Well, guess what? I'm going to propose to you that we can't have people who have dogs in the race to help us. They have to be not objective, but impartial. They can't have an investment in the thing. If I pick one of you guys to help me with the thing, you've got an investment. You're another human being. You've got a stake in it. We have to have somebody help us who doesn't have a stake in it. Well, who's around that might be a candidate, right, for that? Not the Nephilim, God help us. I hope that those bastards stay away, right? I really do. They set us up, right? What would we do? I can't imagine anything but a Holocaust if they came back, right? We'd want to take them out, right? And then they'd take us out, et cetera, et cetera. More and more and more of the same, right? So guess what? Who's the candidates? EBEs, okay? That's EBs. What's an EB? Well, it's an extra biological entity. But let me give you my definition of what's included in an extra biological entity. It ain't just the UFO folk. It's not just the U folks, okay? It can include beings or intelligences who are present to our perceptions in some way, that is, sometimes appearing like extraordinary looking nuts and bolts beings, sometimes appearing diaphanous, sometimes not appearing, to the eyes anyway, at all. Just in the head. You get words. But you're crazy if you do that in this culture, right? If you're hearing that kind of, whoa. But there are plenty of people who apparently are getting some sorts of messages someplace or other. John Edward is a perfect illustration. He gets metaphors from people on the other side, beings, entities, intelligences, whatever they, EBs on the other side. Perfect illustration. In some circumstances, he'd be classified as a nutcase, right? You're having paranoid delusions, sir. Please accept this injection. These can be beings or intelligences who've been here on this planet much longer than we have. The ultra-terrestrial phenomenon. Beings or intelligences from off-planet and or those humans who have crossed over but are contactable and or who make contact with us physical beings by any means. John Edward is an illustration. And instrumental transcommunication, that's when Dad, who's been dead for 6 months, suddenly shows up on a snowy TV screen to his daughter and talks to her. You've probably come across this kind of stuff. It's quite amazing. The electro something voice phenomenon, EVP, that's another version, I forgot the exact terms. Okay. What we need to do is find a way to get in touch with some of these folks now, these beings, and particularly the ones that most of us have had some kind of connection to, either in actual fact, or the people who are the dead, the ghosts, the things that the entities that knock lit candlesticks over in the middle of the night and burn the house down and stuff like that, right? They've gotten an unnecessarily bad rep. Particularly the you folks have gotten an unnecessarily bad rep because, of course, in the media, if it bleeds, it leads. Everybody knows that line. And so we only hear about the bad stories. But then when you read Whitley Strieber and Ann Strieber's stuff, they got, after the publication of Communion, and when it made such a sensation, they got 140,000 letters, and they went over them. They're really, God bless them, you know. They went through them and categorized them. Only 20% of those letters were even beginning to be negative, that told about negative experience. The rest, that would give you 14,000 out of the 140,000. I'm sorry, 28,000 out of the 140,000 were even beginning to be negative. Of those of that 20%, of that 14,000, I'm sorry, 28,000, only 9% after a period of 6 months after maybe a big abduction experience or something like that, something like what Whitley had, only about 9% of those still maintained after 5 to 6 months that it was a negative experience. Even the ones that had a terribly scary experience, after 6 months said, but I realized that, yeah, it was really scary at first, but it was the most important thing that ever happened to me. And they're full of new life and are revived by this experience very often. And then there's another story, which I will read you just the blurb, again, another shameless plug. For the jacket blurb on the back of this book. I say that in this book are everything from reports by people who've initiated successful contact, to serious psychiatric essays, to cartoons, to a disconcerting short story, to the connection with psychedelics, to a kid telling of being levitated out of his bedroom at night for a romp on the local swing set with several little gray you folks, one of whom fell off a swing flat on his back. You just don't. That was from one of Whitley Strieber's newsletters in, I think, 1990, 91. And I was, oh, of course. They take a kid out, they play with, oh, that's charming. Yeah, they've got our number. They know who we are. And they go play with the kids on swings and fall off. Oh, of course. So all this bad rep, not all of it, of course. There are probably some occasions where there's accidents and bad stuff. But I love it when here's the guy in the F-86 and he's zooming in and he's arming his guns and he's going to blow this UFO out of the sky, right? All of a sudden, all the electronics in the cockpit die, right? And he has to break off the attack. As soon as he breaks off the attack, whoop, all the electronics come back. Absolutely. They've got us, they know what the story is, right? And they know that if they come down and they start taking over, that's not the way to deal with us. We can't handle that. If it's another authority figure, oh God, here we go. More killing, more wars, more, oh. Then they'll have to off us, then they'll get trapped in it too, right? But I love the 140,000 letters. 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 140, And of those, only 28,000 were negative. The rest were stories of being healed. I can't think of her name, the therapist in the Bay Area, Evie somebody, I forget her last name. Somebody might remember her. Evie, you know her? Who she is? She has one story from some old guy who had throat cancer. And they abducted him and took him up there. He came back the next morning. Oh, you didn't have throat cancer anymore. Right? Bingo! Oh, is that right? Okay, so now the question is, what we need is the gang of EBEs, whoever they may be. Maybe they're the people we would call spirits of the departed. Maybe they're you folks, or combinations of both. Whoa. Want to get your head all twisted around? Just play with that one. We need to be able to get with them and figure out, in the same way that we would if we were going to a therapist's office and we were having our first interview. We would want to interview this therapist to find out, is this guy okay? You know, are we on the same page? You know, how do we find out? Well, I thought about that for a while, and having done a lot of, how much?
8 minutes.
Excellent. Oh, wow, this is going to work. Okay. I came up with some questions as to questions we would need to ask. If we sat down across the table, or me in my chair and the EBE in their chair, whatever the hell that might turn out to be. What kind of a question would I ask to vet this guy? Can you really help me, or can you help us? And what if I'd been elected by the human beings to talk to this guy who's going to help all the humans? Oh my God, this is way too much of a responsibility, but I imagine it could happen. So here's the first question I would ask. What was God doing before he created the universe? Now that's obviously a trap, right? It's a trick question. If the EBE is dumb enough and authoritarian enough to sucker into that trap, nope, I'm out of here. I'm going to talk to somebody else. The trap is if he's going to say, well, God was, God is, and God is some kind of authority in the universe? Oh, please. If you EBE can't get past that, you and I don't have a whole lot to talk about, and you're not going to be able to help us much as human beings, right? Because you aren't out of the trap yourself. You're still stuck in the same authoritarian baloney that we're stuck in. You're probably PTSD, post-traumatic stress yourself from some other scenario. Do you enjoy any ways of modifying or expanding your own consciousness? Psychoactive compounds, other strategies similar to our meditation? If yes, why do you desire these experiences? And so on. I'm going to ask these, I'm going to dig down in there to try to pull out anything that rings a false note. If he says, no, well, it's like I don't know if you remember Ram Dass, when he was still Richard Alpert, went to and found his guru in India, and he handed the guru a whole mess of acid tabs, right? And here was this guru, and he's very wonderful, and he's up in the mountains in some place in northern India. And he hands in and the guru, oh yeah, I'd like to try this, yes, okay. So he takes a whole handful of them, sticks them in his mouth, no change. Richard Alpert knew that he had met his guru when that happened, right? This guy was already there. That's who I think could be impartial, not have a dog in our race. Not objective, but impartial. Another question I might ask is, what does the phrase sense of humor mean to you? Now that's a trap too, right? If he doesn't come back with a joke, I know that Well, let's see now. And does the sociology of humor or whatever, or the psychological makeup of da 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 da. I know. Nope. We'll go on. Move on to somebody else. And I've got a whole bunch of other ones, but that's enough for now. I think I can stop there. That's fine. I didn't know I could bring it all in an hour and a half. That's great. Yes. I think that's the last slide. Oh, vetting EBEs is the last slide. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm complete. Complete.